Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so today, forget the usual championship chase stuff.
Yeah, we're going somewhere else entirely.
We are plunging into, well, something maybe more fundamental. That Raw struggle for relevance we saw explode on Monday Night Raw recently, just weeks out from WrestleMania.
Right. And we've got this really interesting analysis that argues what we saw wasn't about titles.
Yeah.
It was about who gets to control the story, the narrative.
Which is maybe even more important in WWE, right?
But,
This source we looked at calls it a crownless war.
I like that term, crownless war. It fits because this wasn't your typical road to WrestleMania where it's all sign pointing and title matches set up.
No, this felt different, more chaotic.
Exactly. The source makes a strong case that this Raw was really about that battle for narrative dominance with WrestleMania looming. Its legacy, sure, but also just staying relevant.
Making sure you're the one people are talking about.
Shaping perception, making sure you're not forgotten when it's all over.
Crownless war? Yeah, that really nails it. Because
Yeah.
with Mania so close, these massive egos are colliding, and the stakes, they feel like more than just wins and losses. It's about who stays center stage.
Definitely.
And the piece sort of kicks off by looking at the key players and where they stand, or maybe how precariously they stand. First, Roman Reigns, still the head of the table, looks unshakable,
Usually.
But now the analysis suggests maybe feeling the weight of a fading empire. There's a little crack there, maybe?
I think so. That's what the source implies. For so long, Reigns has had this, impenetrable aura.
Totally.
But the fact that he's reacting so viscerally now, it suggests maybe there is a shift of vulnerability.
And orbiting him, there's Paul Heyman, the ultimate weather vane of power, as the piece calls him.
Yeah.
And the analysis really leans into the ambiguity there, like whose side is he really on?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That uncertainty, it just adds this fantastic layer of intrigue. You're constantly guessing.
And then you throw CM Punk into the mix, the rebel returned.
Oh, yeah. What I found compelling was the source's take that he has, quote, nothing left to lose and everything to prove. That's a dangerous cocktail in this business.
Isn't it just someone with that mindset, they can really disrupt things, throw a wrench in the works?
Absolutely. And that desperation, or maybe it's just freedom because he's unburdened, it makes him incredibly unpredictable, volatile.
A chaotic element.
Yeah.
And finally, there's Seth Rollins.
Right. Mr. Monday Night.
Who, as the source highlights, is really trying hard to position himself as the core, the guy who carries the show, the heart of the business.
Yeah, he wants to be the guy.
So our mission today, for everyone listening, is to really dig into the why behind all this chaos on Raw. What are the motivations? What's this fight for narrative control really about? And what does it signal for WrestleMania, even if there aren't immediate title implications?
Let's do it. That opening segment was something else.
Okay, so let's dive in there. Reigns is in the ring. Heyman's with him. Familiar sight.
Seen it a million times.
Yeah. But the tension, like the source points out, it felt different this time. Heavier.
Yeah, you could feel it. And Reigns immediately calls out CM Punk.
Right, specifically referencing things Punk said in the past. Comments that have clearly been bugging Reigns, eating away at his perception of his own historic reign.
He's challenging Punk's version of history, Punk's narrative.
Exactly. Reigns knows that context, knows how Punk's words could, undermine the whole image he's built.
But then, what's fascinating is how Seth Rollins decides to inject himself.
Yeah, he comes out.
And he doesn't just interrupt, he tries to work the Sacramento crowd. But the source notes their reaction was kind of flat, lethargic and unenchanted.
Ouch. That's
Yeah.
not the reaction Rollins wants.
Definitely not. It wasn't that huge pop he was probably looking for.
And the source calls that silence or lack of huge reaction an indictment, suggesting the crowd just wasn't buying his attempt to grab the spotlight right then.
It's a pretty harsh take.
It is. But could it also be? Maybe. The crowd was just waiting for the inevitable explosion between Reigns and Punk. And Rollins felt like a speed bump.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't a rejection of Rollins himself, but more like, hold on, we know what's coming next, let's get to it. Anticipation.
Yeah.
But still, from Rollins' viewpoint inside the story, that lack of immediate buzz, that could feel like a failure. Like he's not quite the center of gravity he thinks he is or wants to be.
Good point. Perspective matters. And it kind of sets the stage for the chaos that erupts, right? Reigns maybe feeling challenged, maybe feeling his control slipping.
Yeah.
He just lashes out, attacks Rollins.
Boom. Just like that.
But then Heyman laughs.
That laugh, what was that?
Seriously, what's the psychology there? Is he just amused by the mayhem, or is it something else? More calculated.
Knowing Heyman, you have to lean towards calculated, don't you?
Probably.
It could just be him enjoying the chaos, sure. Maybe even a little dig at Reigns losing his cool. But it's more likely strategic.
How so?
It plants doubt in Reigns' mind, makes him question Heyman's loyalty even for a second, or at least highlights that Reigns isn't fully in control anymore. It's classic Heyman. Destabilized through mind games.
Which makes Reigns even angrier.
Apparently so.
Because he then turns his fury on Heyman, physically toppling him, as the source puts it.
Yeah, that was shocking.
It really was. We've seen Reigns intimidate, obviously, but this felt different, more desperate, almost panicked.
It felt like a breakdown.
What does attacking Heyman, his longtime, conciliere, what does that say about the state of his empire?
It suggests the foundation is shaking. Even within whatever version of the bloodline exists now, Reigns projects control. Always.
Always.
But this outburst, it shows the pressure's getting to him. He's hitting out at the one guy who's been key to maintaining that power structure. It reads as desperation, maybe even fear that he's losing his grip on everything, including the narrative.
And just as Heyman hits the mat, then CM Punk finally arrives.
The place erupts.
And the source describes his attack on Reigns as this fury that blurred past and present.
That's good phrasing, because you feel it. You feel the history, the years of animosity.
It's not just about this moment, is it?
No way. There's so much baggage, so much unresolved stuff between them. Punk's attack is about reclaiming lost time, settling old scores, proving he still belongs at the top.
Asserting his relevance in a landscape he feels he was pushed out of.
Right. He wants back in that main event picture, that main narrative.
But the chaos isn't over. Not by a long shot.
Nope. Enter Rollins again.
Ever the opportunist, as the source calls him. Slides back in, curb stomp. But not to Reigns this time.
No, he targets Punk.
A second curb stomp in, 7 days? Vicious. What's Rollins saying there? Why Punk?
He's staking his claim amidst the chaos, sending a message. Don't forget about me.
This isn't just a two-man show.
Exactly. He's forcing himself into their narrative, reminding everyone he's a threat to both of them. Taking out Punk disrupts their dynamic and tries to reposition himself as the central figure heading towards Mania. A power play. A statement.
Okay, so this brings us back to that core question from the text. No titles were on the line in that brawl, so what was it really about?
Yeah, what was the motivation?
The piece argues it's about being remembered, about survival in WWE, a fight for legacy itself.
And that feels right. In that world, your value is tied to your visibility, right? Your impact.
If you're forgotten.
You're done. Professional wrestling death, basically.
Yeah.
So this brawl, it wasn't about gold belts. It was about cementing your spot in the WrestleMania story, making sure you're still part of the conversation.
So Rollins standing tall at the end, over Reigns, over Punk. Even without a title, that image speaks volumes.
It does. It shows his ambition. He wants that central spot, that narrative control.
It's just so different from those classic WrestleMania builds, where the championship was always the sun, everything orbited around.
Totally. The source even contrasts it with, like, Cena versus The Rock. Huge feud. But the stakes were crystal clear. World title implications, legacies on the line, explicitly stated.
Right. But here, we have this triangle of turmoil, as the source puts it.
Yeah.
But the prize isn't a belt. It's narrative control. The power to shape the story heading into the biggest show.
But what does that actually mean, though? Narrative control. How do they exert that in WWE terms?
That's a good question. Practically, it probably means getting more mic time, right? More promos to state your case.
Okay, yeah. Being featured in the key video packages, the main event segments.
Exactly. Being positioned in a way that gets the audience behind your story, or at least invested in it, influencing how people see you and your rivals.
So it's about making sure your story is the one everyone's talking about going into WrestleMania.
Yeah.
Capturing the buzz.
Yeah. And within that battle, Paul Heyman's role gets even more fascinating and complicated.
Oh, absolutely. The source basically calls him a potential true puppeteer.
Pulling the strings behind the curtain.
And his whole renewed thing with Punk, it's viewed with heavy suspicion in this analysis.
As it should be, given their history.
Exactly. The source specifically brings up Money in the Bank 2013, that brutal betrayal.
Yeah, turning on Punk with the ladder, costing him the briefcase.
So can Punk really trust Heyman now? Is Heyman genuinely helping Punk? Or is this just another move in some bigger Heyman-esque game?
It adds that layer of psychological warfare, doesn't it? Makes you second-guess everything Heyman does or says.
It really does. Is he an ally? Is he playing everyone? That lack of trust, built on years of history. It's classic wrestling storytelling.
Those past betrayals always hang in the air.
They do. And that history just makes the current stuff richer. It informs how we see the characters, why they might act a certain way. It makes the alliances feel fragile, and the betrayals hit harder.
And if Heyman turned on Ponte so decisively before, the odds of him not doing it again feel pretty slim, right? Creates this constant tension whenever they interact.
You're always waiting for the other shoe to drop with Heyman.
Another really interesting point the source made was about who wasn't there during this chaos on Raw.
Right, the absences.
John Cena, Cody Rhodes. Usually you'd expect major players like them to be heavily involved in the Mania build.
Especially Cody, given his story.
So why highlight their absence specifically in relation to this Reigns-Punk-Rollins crownless war?
The source sees it as symbolic. Like this particular episode, this segment, was deliberately laser-focused on this immediate conflict. Reigns, Punk, Rollins.
Shutting out everything else for a moment?
Kind of. Their absence emphasizes that this fight was about establishing who's at the forefront of the narrative right now, heading towards Mania, even if it meant other top stars took a backseat for that night.
It speaks to maybe the limited TV time and the strategic choices about who gets that spotlight in these crucial final weeks.
Exactly. It feels like a deliberate choice to frame this three-way power struggle as the most pressing issue at that moment.
So if they're not fighting for titles, not right now, what is the ultimate prize in this specific conflict? The source has a wild suggestion.
What's that?
It might be the soul of Paul Heyman.
Wow. Yeah.
Describing Heyman as the crownless kingmaker, the guy whose allegiance, whose influence holds immense power.
That's actually a really compelling way to frame it.
Isn't it? Because Heyman's endorsement, his brain, his ability to shape how things are perceived, that's incredibly valuable.
Invaluable. Whoever has Heyman genuinely in their corner gets a huge advantage, not just on screen, but probably in the subtle power plays too.
So the WrestleMania match or matches involving these guys, even without a title necessarily being the main focus between them, it becomes a battle for influence, for the loyalty of the guy who can make or break narratives.
Yeah, a battle for the kingmaker himself.
Which, as the source says, makes this whole thing far more dangerous than a standard title match.
Because the stakes are longer term. It's about positioning, about who controls the story after WrestleMania 2.
Right. It's not just about one night, one victory. It's about shaping the entire landscape of WWE moving forward.
Exactly. Title reigns come and go. But controlling the narrative, that can define careers, influence who gets pushed, and ultimately affect the direction of the whole company. That kind of power.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's way bigger than just a belt.
And that leads us right back to that powerful closing question from the source material.
The big one.
Who will still matter when the lights go down and the crowd goes home? It really hits you thinking about how fast things change in wrestling, that constant fight for relevance.
It really does.
Yeah.
That need to stay hot, keep the audience hooked on your story. And hopefully for everyone listening who wants to go beyond just the surface results, this deep dive gives a bit of a framework, a way to think about the forces pulling the strings in these wrestling stories.
Absolutely. It's not just about picking winners. It's trying to understand the power struggles, the fight for influence, how these narratives get built and torn down.
Yeah.
So as WrestleMania gets closer, maybe think about this. Beyond who wins their match.
Yeah.
What does this intense scramble for narrative control tell us about pro wrestling itself?
And maybe even broader, about, how fleeting fame and relevance can be anywhere storytelling is king.
Definitely something to chew on long after the final bell rings.